Kia ora, ko Louis Konzaho, nau mai ki te whare. Welcome to the House. On Mondays during most sitting weeks, the Prime Minister holds a post-cabinet press conference in Parliament's theatrette. This is when members of the press gallery come and ask questions of the Prime Minister and sometimes other ministers regarding announcements made at that press conference. You've probably seen the photos of ministers sitting around the circular table on the 10th floor of the Beehive. That's Cabinet, which refers to the senior decision-making body within the executive, with meetings chaired by the Prime Minister. Decisions made by Cabinet are both reactive and proactive, whether it's deciding on how to respond to a crisis or what policies they want to roll out as legislation in the coming weeks. There is a lengthy deliberation process, though, before the PM gets in the lift down to the theatrette to announce those decisions to the cameras and the journos. It might surprise you to learn that, like Parliament, the executive also has committees. These are known as Cabinet committees. Just like their parliamentary counterparts, they are a forum for more detailed consideration of policy, but that consideration is done exclusively by ministers. There are currently 8 Cabinet committees, 3 of them chaired by the Prime Minister, with the rest chaired by high-ranking ministers. Recently, the House sat down with the chair of the Cabinet Social Outcomes Committee, Louise Upston, to shed some light on a largely unknown area of government and see just how the government policy sausage is made.
Louise Upston, and I'm the Minister for Social Development and Employment.
And you're also the MP for
Taupo.
And as part of Cabinet, you lead one of the Cabinet committees. Could you explain a little bit about what a Cabinet committee is?
Yeah, so it's a part of the government process that not many people get to see. But before any paper goes up to Cabinet on a Monday, it goes through a Cabinet committee. So the Social Outcomes is the committee that I chair, covers issues like education, social development, health, justice, wide range of issues. So if there's a piece of policy that you as a minister want to put forward that leads to legislation, you take it to a Cabinet committee and we debate in the Cabinet committee the merits, the risks, the challenges, or any kind of overlaps with other ministers and portfolios that need to be kind of worked through.
So before you're even bringing a policy to Cabinet, you've already kind of sounded it with the Cabinet committee.
Absolutely. But there's actually a step before that, because what happens when you'll draft a Cabinet committee paper and you will send it out to other ministers for consultation. You'll also send it out to departments for consultation. So there's quite a lengthy process to even get a paper that goes up to the Cabinet committee ahead of it going to Cabinet. And look, if it runs smoothly, if you have a paper at a Cabinet committee and it's all fine, then on the Monday at Cabinet, it's reported back. So you don't necessarily then go through it in detail with the whole Cabinet.
And is it just proactive things like policy making, or is it, say, something's happened in the news and you have to make a statement on it? Would you talk about that at Cabinet committee as well?
No, Cabinet committee, so there's a couple of different ones. I don't chair the Appointments and Honours Committee, but it's one I'm a member of. So that is all looking at the appointments that we make to government boards, committees, and entities, tribunals. So there's actually quite a lot of appointments, and it just means other ministers have got visibility. Sometimes you might be putting someone up that you've not met personally, you don't know them, but someone else might say, actually they were really great on this other organisation. I thoroughly support that recommendation. So different committees have different purposes. And it is a really important way for us to get visibility about other ministers and their work program, and particularly when there's an overlap with some of the work we're doing.
And you're all very busy as ministers, right? So it's probably the chance, as opposed to the main Cabinet meeting, where a lot of the machinery work is done.
Absolutely. And if I think about the work that happens in a Cabinet committee, if you've done work with colleagues beforehand, as I said, the consultation that happens ahead of the Cabinet committee is really important. And then there'll be differences of opinions, as there always are. So part of what the job is of the chair is balancing out when you've got competing interests. To get to a point, you might defer a paper. You might send a paper away for more work. You might say to a minister, you need to work with these colleagues and come back with a paper that is, more agreeable for competing interests across ministers. Or you might make some changes to the recommendations before it goes up to Cabinet.
Would you also, before it goes to the Cabinet Committee, kind of contact other ministers and get them on side and before you go to the Cabinet Committee meeting?
Yeah, so if I think about papers that I've taken in the past, particularly if it's a really technical paper, it might be a subject that other ministers won't necessarily have any visibility or any experience of. And so it means it's also more efficient when it comes to the Cabinet Committee because ministers already have background knowledge. And sometimes it might be because you're seeking a level of funding. For example, if it's a big IT project, there might be several rounds before it comes anywhere near a Cabinet Committee. Obviously, the budget process is different, but ministers are busy in their own portfolios, and so when you need them to support a decision that you're putting forward, those pre-meetings and pre-discussions can be really helpful in, having their level of understanding so that they can make a decision and not sort of bog down the Cabinet Committee timing.
And a Cabinet meeting on a Monday, it's sort of, when people think of it, they think of all the ministers sitting around that round table and, confidential discussion. But in the Cabinet Committee meeting, officials come in and brief ministers. Is that right?
Yeah, so in a Cabinet Committee, you're taking a paper. There might be a question that one of your colleagues asks, and you can ask to have the officials come in. So the officials from that agency will come in and sit at the table and answer those questions. When you're in Cabinet, there are no officials. So that is why any of the kind of detail or queries need to be worked through in the Cabinet Committee while you've got access to the officials who can provide that level of detailed information that ministers are often interested in.
And just to be clear to listeners, when we're talking about officials, we're talking about people from MB or Justice.
Absolutely. So sometimes you'll have someone from Treasury. If it was a paper that I was taking forward on social development issues, then yes, I'd have officials from the Ministry of Social Development who would come in and be able to answer those questions.
So typically, what's the sort of format of how it's run? I suppose you have a different approach as chair, and every chair would have a different approach. But generally, what's the kind of expected way to run a meeting? Yeah,
so often it'll depend on how many papers are on the agenda. Sometimes you might say, right, well, these ones are the ones that we expect will need more time for discussion. So I might either front load those to the start of the agenda to make sure we've got time for discussion. Other times you'll have papers that are on a similar topic, so you'll group them together. There's a range of ways really, and look, sometimes a paper that you think will be like completely non-controversial, there may be some fishhooks that I've completely missed, and so those are always a bit more fun because the meeting doesn't necessarily go the way that I planned.
Would there be anything else that you'd want to add to elucidate about Cabinet committees or about the Cabinet decision-making process in general that the public should know?
Yeah, I just think it's really important for people to understand that, when decisions are made around policy and particularly when it comes to a law change, there's a process that often takes months before that.
It's not done on a whim.
It's not done on a whim, and there is a lot of discussion, debate, testing, challenging, sometimes rework to get a piece of policy and a decision to a place that Cabinet is happy with. And, that means well defining a problem, making sure that you are explaining what the options are that you've considered, why you've picked a particular solution, what are the risks in that solution, how you're going to communicate it to the public. So these are all the sorts of things that we work through ahead of a paper coming to a Cabinet committee and then being discussed when it's there. And I think that also helps to explain to people, because they'll say, oh, well, you said you were going to do this thing, why isn't it done yet? The process from a policy, a decision being made, Cabinet getting approval, legislation being drafted, legislation coming back to another Cabinet committee, because there's one that specifically looks at legislation, the bill being introduced before it gets passed, is months, can be years. And I know that that's something that people often express concerns about, how long things take. But it's being thorough, which is what New Zealanders would expect us to do.
You don't want to be having to come back and do the exact same thing 6 months later because you missed something, right?
Absolutely. And there is nothing more frustrating than having missed something. And so that's when we talk about Cabinet responsibility. It might be me as a minister taking a paper, but I'm relying on my colleagues and the other agencies to have really had a decent look to see if there's anything, any unintended consequences or any touch points with other agencies that we need to take into account.
That was Louise Upston, Chair of the Cabinet Social Outcomes Committee. I te whakarongo koe ki te whare. You've been listening to The House, a program made with funding from Parliament's Office of the Clerk. Mātua.